Morning. It's good to be back with you this morning on this Tuesday. Hope you each had a great Labor Day. Good day. Hopefully got a little bit of rest at least. So I hope all is well as we continue together in our time in Luke. Today we're going to read Luke chapter 9 verses 28 through 36. It's the Transfiguration, one of the more interesting stories in all the Bible. So let's read Luke 9:28 through 36. Now, about 8 days after saying these things, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and went up to the mountain to pray. While he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make three dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud a voice came and said, This is my son, the chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, they found Jesus alone, and they kept silent in those days and told no one about any of the things they had seen. Yeah, I can see that. I can see not saying, "Hey, y'all, let me tell you this amazing thing we saw." There's a lot of very interesting things about the Transfiguration. So let's just kind of talk things I think that are worth taking note of in this passage before we kind of get to a deeper spiritual level. First, I've said several times, many of you may have heard me say this. Jesus' life on earth was hard. Um, Sunday, I was giving context to Matthew 8, where we were in, and Jesus says there in Matthew 8, foxes have nests, or foxes have birds have nests, foxes have dens, but the Son of Man hath nowhere to lay his head. So Jesus, um, basically said, I don't really have a home. I don't have anywhere I can call home. He has places he could go to, but he didn't have a home per se. Jesus' life was hard. It was a hard life. And so there are a few times we see him in getting the glory that he really deserves. Once is on his baptism, when we see each person of the Trinity there, Father, Son, and Spirit. I'll say Palm Sunday. On Palm Sunday, we see him worshipped, getting the glory he deserves. But on the Transfiguration, we see Jesus at the Transfiguration in his divine state. We see him as he truly is. We see him in all of his glory, and we see him as he appears. We see him um, just beautiful in glory and in glory, and just it's amazing. So we see here Jesus pure divine glory. It's an amazing sight. Kind of some other things I think that are interesting. First, one of the questions we ask sometimes is, well, we know people in heaven. Well, we see Jesus here speaking with Moses and Elijah, and Peter recognized them. So I think that's just an interesting observation that Peter seemed to recognize these saints who were in glory at that point. So that's just another interesting observation. Um, I like our boy Peter. Uh, it says here in my text that just as they were, this is verse 33, just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make three dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. And I think some translations say it said, Peter, not knowing what to say, said. So I like that our boy Peter just opens his mouth and whatever comes out, comes out. So that's another interesting things that I think are interesting. But this is a very powerful thing because we see here Jesus talking with two Old Testament saints who are seen as the main figures of their they re Moses represents the law. Is the lawgiver. Moses went on Mount Sinai. Moses received the law. Moses, the Pentateuch, the books of Moses. Moses is the one. And Elijah, there are a lot of great prophets in the Old Testament, so it's kind of hard to pick one. But Elijah's awesome. We've seen Elijah, mentioned before. It says here, verse 20, this is earlier in this chapter. Um, it was said by some that John had been raised by the dead. By some, Elijah had appeared. And so we see that when they think of a prophet, Elijah is one of the main ones we think of. So there we see the law and the prophets, Jesus says in Matthew's gospel. Um, and I think even in Luke, when he said, well, one of my favorite references to the great commandment to love God, love neighbor. And Jesus says, you love the Lord your God, all of love the Lord your God, all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And on this hinges the law and the prophets. So the law of the prophets, upon which the love of God and love of neighbor hinges upon, well, the law was Moses, the prophets Elijah. So, as representatives of those two areas. So we see Jesus here kind of, I don't say uniting both of those, but showing how he is superior, how he is not superior, he is the fulfillment. It says here is speaking, saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking with him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. So we see the law pointing to Jesus. We see the prophets pointing to Jesus. We see all of Scripture pointing to Jesus. As Christians, we read all of the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament both, understanding that they point us to Jesus. That is what we are looking for. So we see Jesus as a Christian. I see Jesus all throughout the Old Testament. As a Christian, I see Jesus in the law. So, thus, in the Passover, the lamb who was the perfect lamb that was sacrificed. That was pointing us to Jesus. Likewise, when we see the prophets proclaiming the one who will bring truth and justice, we see them that pointing to Jesus. So we see this. That's why I think the Transfiguration is such a beautiful thing because we really see embodied this truth that we believe that it's all pointing to Jesus. It's all pointing to Jesus, and there we see them together. Jesus in his divine glorious state, Moses in his glory in the divine state, Elijah in his divine state, all talking with Jesus. And it all points us to Jesus. That's the that's the point. That's the point. It's all about Jesus, friends. Oh, how we can make it so complicated, can't we? We can make it so complicated, but it's not. It's really not. It's about Jesus. And if we try to build our faith or have our faith focused on something other than Jesus, then we're missing the point and we're missing the purpose. And so there are many important things as Christians that we can focus on. Many things that are worthy of our time and worthy of our conversations and worthy of our reflections and worthy of all these things. But friends, in the end, the Transfiguration shows us that's all about Jesus. We see Moses, we see Elijah, we see Jesus. And Moses and Elijah are talking to Jesus about what he is about to accomplish. Um, and I will say 32 is just an interesting little tidbit. But this is 32. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory, and the two men who stood with him. Pay attention, stay awake. Stay awake. Don't become so heavy laden. Keep your like one of my old football coaches used to always say, keep your head on a swivel, look around. Because I think God is around us all the time in many ways, in many places, looking to speak and looking to allow us to hear. He's there. He's there all around us. We just have to pay attention. Peter, James, and John, they paid attention. They didn't always get it right, and Peter put his foot in his mouth a few seconds later, but they were awake and paying attention. So we need to stay awake and pay attention too. So the Transfiguration shows us it's all about Jesus. It's all pointing to Jesus. So don't get so focused on things that aren't about Jesus that you miss what it's really about. It's all about Jesus. Hey, thanks for being with us. We will pick up tomorrow with chapter 30, verse 9, chapter 37. Have a great day.